Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I'm the Director of Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. MOAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibitions and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the challenging circumstances we are all in, and I hope everyone in the audience today is safe and healthy. MOAD stands with Black Lives Matter in recognizing and condemning the ongoing systemic violence against Black people. We honor and mourn the senseless murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, Casey Goodson Jr., Patrick Warren Sr., Andre Hill, and so many others who have lost their lives from police brutality and racial injustice, including those whose names we do not know. We want to acknowledge that MOAD's commitment to racial justice is ongoing, and as such, we will continue to say their names and to hold space and honor these victims. I also want to acknowledge the spaces we are occupying. Though we are gathering virtually, many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent. Our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose land we are located. It is with deep respect that MOAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, we reside on unceded native lands, and thank the indigenous people of the Bay Area and beyond who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I want to welcome you to MOAD Online and to our series, Conversations Across the Diaspora. Thank you to our host, Sarah Ladipo Manyika, who is generously volunteering her time and her brilliance for this series. I want to acknowledge Peggy Woodford Forbes for helping to support Conversations Across the Diaspora, and to thank everyone here today who has joined us, with special appreciation for those who have donated to the museum during this pandemic. We would not be able to produce this programming without your support. I also want to thank the San Francisco Public Library for presenting this program with us today. They are such an amazing institution and resource. We have another partnership with SFPL coming up on April 28th with the incredible poet and cultural critic Hanif Abdurraqib. You can find this event on both of our websites. Today, we are thrilled to be presenting a conversation with Dr. Henry Louis Gates, Jr. I will introduce our host, who will then introduce our esteemed guest. But first, I do want to acknowledge that Dr. Gates has been involved with the museum since the very beginning and was instrumental in launching the institution and making it what it is today, and MOAD will be forever in his debt. I offer my humble and heartfelt gratitude. Now on to our host. Sarah Ladipo Manyika was raised in Nigeria and has lived in Kenya, France, Zimbabwe, and England. Sarah is a novelist, short story writer, and essayist, and founding books editor for Aussie.com. Her debut novel, Independence, is an international bestseller, while her second novel, Like a Mule Bringing Ice Cream to the Sun, has been translated into a number of languages. Her nonfiction includes personal essays and intimate profiles of people she meets, from Mrs. Harris to Pastor Evan Mawarire to Toni Morrison, Margaret Busby, and Michelle Obama. Sarah previously served on MOAD's board and currently serves as board president for the Women's Writing Residency Hedgebrook. Sarah is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, a San Francisco Public Library laureate, and a member of the National Book Critics Circle. Sarah, thank you, and please take it away.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's been such a pleasure and honor to bring this series to MOAD and to work with the ever amazing Elizabeth Gessel. And I want to say a special thank you again to Peggy Forbes. You're a rock star, and our phenomenal guests and audience. And speaking of phenomenal guests, we have the most phenomenal guest in Henry Louis Gates Jr., who is with us. And I'm just going to do a very brief introduction. A true introduction would basically take several hours or several days. So this is just very brief. Henry Louis Gates Jr. is an Alphonse Fletcher University professor and director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard University. He's also an Emmy Award-winning, Peabody Award-winning, NAACP Award-winning, many more award-winning filmmaker. He's a literary scholar, he's a journalist, a cultural critic, an institution builder, And Professor Gates has authored 25 books and 23 documentary films. Every month I have to check because the number goes up, it seems, every month, including wonders in terms of the films, including Wonders of the African World, African American Lives, Faces of America, Black in Latin America, Black America since MLK, and Africa's Great Civilizations, to name but a few. Most recently, he brought us a phenomenal 4-part series on the Black Church with the sonic subtitle, "This is our story, this is our song." And he's also the magic behind Finding Your Roots, which is the groundbreaking genealogy series, which is now in its 7th season on PBS. Professor Gates has written for basically every leading publication. He's a recipient of 58 honorary degrees and numerous prizes. He was a member of the first class to be awarded a Genius Grant by the MacArthur Foundation in 1981. And in 1998, he became the first African-American scholar to be awarded the National Humanities Medal. He earned his BA in history from Yale, an MA and a PhD in English literature from Clare College at the University of Cambridge, where he's now an honorary fellow. In 2018, he was one of 15 alumni of African descent honored in the exhibition Black Cantabs, History Makers at the Cambridge University Library. Professor Gates is a member of everything of note, from the American Academy of Arts and Letters to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and he serves on a wide array of boards, including the New York Public Library, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Aspen Institute, Jazz at Lincoln Center, and the list just goes on and on and on. And I can honestly say that I can think of no other person in the world who better embodies the African diaspora globally through his life and through his amazing life's work. And so I am so honored to have this very, very special guest, the one and only Dr. Professor Henry Louis Gates Jr., who I'm also so pleased to be able to call my friend, Skip Gates.
Indeed, thank you. Thank you for that overly generous introduction. But it's an honor to be in your series, and I'm your final guest. I think that you should continue this series next year. We need it. We need it urgently.
Well, it's just so wonderful to have you. Thank you so much. You know, this is a museum, so I think I just have to begin our conversation by asking you to tell us what, behind your amazing, fabulous self, what is this image that we are seeing?
That is a painting by the African-American artist called Jonathan Green, who lives now in South Carolina. He was from North Carolina. And it was chosen by my older daughter, Maggie, when she was 9 years old. We were deciding whether to move to Duke from Cornell in the late 80s. And so we went down to live for a semester because I'd never lived in the South before. And my children's mother is a white American. So I didn't know about that. You know, they talked about how liberal it was, but compared to what? So we decided to give it a try. And you know what it's like when you move little kids. They were 9 and 7, and they were all disoriented and wondering why in the world we were in this new place. And I read the Raleigh newspaper, the Raleigh, North Carolina newspaper, and it said there was an opening on Sunday by an artist I'd never heard of called Jonathan Green. And I took them, just the three of us, and I said that they could pick a painting, and whatever they picked, I would buy, and because I wanted them to become collectors. I bought my first 4 pieces of African art when I was 19 years old in Dar es Salaam. And I've been, as you know, you've been to my home, I'm a collector and collect African art, and largely under the tutelage of my mentor at Cambridge, Wole Soyinka. It's taught me so much about African art, and particularly Yoruba art and Beninian art, and I collect African-American art. I'm on the board of the Studio Museum of Harlem and the Whitney. So that's Jonathan Green. And as you can see, he's very much influenced by Kerry James Marshall with the black face, and Romare Bearden with the composition, sort of collage-like composition. But thank you for asking. And who did the painting behind you?
Well, this is a painting that I got in New Mexico, and it was supposed to be a gift for my dear husband, and I managed to just steal it back to have in my office as well. So
aren't those the best?
Artist, yes.
They're the best kind of gifts. You know,
Yeah.
you buy them for your friend and you go, my friend's never going to get this gift. This gift is for me.
Yeah, exactly. So Skip, I mean, you obviously your children have great taste in art as well. And I want to go back a little bit to your childhood and ask you what, I understand that I seem to recall that you grew up in a small town called Piedmont in West Virginia. And I wondered if you could tell us a little something about your childhood.
I was born in 1950 in Piedmont, West Virginia. And it is halfway between Pittsburgh and Washington, D.C. in the Allegheny Mountains on the Potomac River. It's not exactly known as a major center for African-American culture. You know, it's in the Allegheny Mountains. I'm a country boy. I grew up hunting and fishing. On the first day of deer season is a holiday. And then people go and shoot things. I never enjoyed that, but I love to fish. And I still love to fish. And my family, you know, I've been interested in my own family history, my own genealogy since I was 9 years old, and when we buried my father's father, Edward St. Lawrence Gates. My father showed us my great-great-grandmother, Jane Gates's obituary and her sepia photograph, which is upstairs in our family history room now. And the next day, the day after my grandfather's funeral, I asked my father to buy me a composition book. And that night, in front of our little 12-inch black and white TV, I interviewed my parents about what only later I would learn is called one's genealogy or one's family tree. And I was able to go back to my great-great-grandmother, Jane Gates, on my father's line, and to my great-great-grandparents on my mother's line. But I really wanted to find out where I was from in Africa. And so you could say after 1977, I had a bad case of roots envy. You know, I envied Alex Haley. I wanted to find out. And the irony is, after we invented the series that's now known as Finding Your Roots, and they traced my ancestry, my family has lived in a 30-mile radius from where I was born for 200 years. I descend from 3 sets of free people of color, 2 sets on my mother's side, 1 set on my father's side. And 2 sets of my 4th great grandparents were freed by the American Revolution. And the 3rd set on my father's side were freed in 1823. And one of those 4th great grandfathers fought in the American Revolution, a Black man named John Redmond. I've written about him, and because of him, my brother's Dr. Paul Gates, an oral surgeon, and I were inducted to the Sons of the American Revolution, which is not exactly crawling with Black people. So the whole time I'm looking across the Atlantic for Kunta Kinte, and my roots are right under my feet. And it was very liberating. So I have deep roots in this curious little area that is in the mountains, and it's not in the urban north, and it's not in the deep south. And the people there, I think my ancestors were freed so early because there were very little use for enslaved people. There's no tobacco fields, there's no cotton, there's no sugar. So for whatever reasons, they became free. And the other thing, there was in my town, 2,500 people. It's a paper mill town. My father worked at paper mill for 37 years. Irish, Italian paper mill town. The year I was born, I think there were about 350 Black people, most of them my cousins. And but despite that, the famous Supreme Court case, Brown v. Board was 1954, that ordered the with all deliberate speed, which means never, the desegregation of schools. But my predominantly white Appalachian County integrated without a peep, not one civil rights march. A year later, in 1955, and I started at the white school, as we called it, in 1956. So I've always gone to an integrated school. And unlike the memoirs of Richard Wright and other Black people, I was not discriminated against in school. Like my brother, who was 6 grades ahead of me, I was always well treated. The school embraced our ideals of a meritocracy. It sounds corny, but they really did. And I was one of the two smartest kids in the class, and they treated me like that. So I was very blessed. I had a great childhood, and I've had a great education since.
So you've painted a wonderful picture there and just sort of highlighted the diversity, you know, different people's experiences. You were one of the smartest kids, as you were saying, but you did not fulfill your parents' dream, or at least your mother's dream, of becoming a doctor or even a lawyer. So, you know, what went wrong?
My daddy wanted me to be a lawyer, my mama, a doctor. For my mother, you know, I mean, every Christmas, I got a stethoscope, birthday, a dissecting kit. And I don't know what it's like for you, but when I was growing up, smart little Black girls and boys were meant to be doctors. And if you couldn't get in med school, then a lawyer and maybe a minister somewhere down the road, you know, but being a doctor, you know, for my mom, in heaven, there was a Father, Son, the Holy Ghost, and a medical doctor sitting right next to the Holy Ghost. And I was terrified. Even when I went to Cambridge, I majored in history. I was a scholar in the house in history at Yale. And I got a Mellon Foundation to go to Cambridge, where just by accident, I was going to get a second degree and then come back and go to medical school or law school. And just as fate would have it, I ran into two Africans who changed my life. One was Wole Soyinka. I didn't even know how to say his name. I thought he was Polish when I saw Wole Soyinka. And the other was...
Have you done his roots? Do you know, maybe?
No. His hair is too long for me to do his roots. He's like Cornel West. Every barber I know says, if you get Professor Soyinka in here, I'll give you $500. You know, if you get Cornel West in here, I'll give you $1,000. But no, I wish he would let me do his roots. And the other one was Kwame Anthony Appiah, as we say back home, or Appiah, as they say in America. Anthony was a second year at Clare College, and Wole was in exile because, you know, the Nigerian governments have a way of just trying to cancel him. And I don't mean in the way of cancel culture. I'm talking about transitioning him to the land of the ancestors. So he's always finding refuge somewhere. And just think about that confluence. Just what a lucky person I am. I happen to get a fellowship. I'm the first Black person to get a Mellon Fellowship from Yale. I go to this college I'd never heard of, Clare College. Now, I had wanted to be a Rhodes Scholar. I had wanted to go to Oxford, Cambridge. I wanted to go to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. I wanted to go to Oxford, Cambridge. I'm not going to apologize for that or pretend that I didn't, because they were synonymous with elite education. And my father's first cousin, his mother was Gates, the brother of my grandfather, the sister of my grandfather. He graduated from Harvard Law School in 1949, and his wife was a Black woman who got a PhD in comparative literature from Harvard in 1955, and she was Black. So the Ivy League was very much in my head. But somehow in adolescence, I began to learn about Oxford and Cambridge and Rhodes Scholars, and I applied for all these fellowships. And Sarah, I lost the first 6 fellowships, and I was Black. I was from West Virginia. I was junior Phi Beta Kappa. I was graduating Summa. How was I not going to get these fellowships? I must have just been an asshole or something in these interviews. I lost all these fellowships, and I was down to the last fellowship, and I just decided to go in there and be myself because I wasn't going to get it anyway. And one of the happiest days of my life, I got the phone call, I got the fellowship. So I ended up at Clare in October of 1973. Every white person, everybody at Clare was white except for, 2 other Black people. And everybody kept saying, you met Anthony Appiah, you met Anthony Appiah. And I didn't know about white people in England, but when white Americans say that, the person has to be Black. They never ask you if you met, Prince Harry. They ask if you met Meghan Markle, right? So I see this Black guy walking through Old Court at Clare, and I walked up to him and I said, I don't know anything about you, but your name must be Anthony Appiah. And he almost died. He said, how'd you know? I said, it had to be you because you're the other one. And then I said that I would really like to study African literature because this was a free degree. It's a second BA, which turns into an MA in the Oxbridge fashion after 5 years. You send them £5, they send you a master's degree. And that's what most Americans do, like Rhodes Scholars. And so why I wanted to study literature, particularly African literature. And they said, oh, there's this African guy who is an extraordinary fellow, capital E, capital F, visiting Churchill College, named, of course, for Winston Churchill. And his name was Wole Soyinka. And I'd never heard of this brother, you know. And in those days, we didn't even have telephones. So you had to write a letter to the professor, put it in the post, then wait for a written response. And he agreed to see me. And the rest, as they say, is history. And he knew Anthony's father, Joe Appiah, who's like the John Adams of Ghana. He and Nkrumah were roommates in London. And the two of them took me out for an Indian meal after about a month. And they said, we brought you here to tell you something. You are not going to be a doctor. You are going to be a professor. You're put on this earth to teach literature. So wake up, you're going to teach African literature and you're going to build African-American studies. And it took me 2 years before I could tell my mother and father that I had changed course and that I even took tutorial supervisions, we call them, at Cambridge in biology, in inorganic chemistry, and in physics. In addition to courses in the English faculty, because I was still going to be a doctor. And thank God I met Soyinka and Anthony, and
wow.
Here we are today.
So that's a wonderful story, and you've gone straight to Cambridge, but I want to pull you back a little bit because you did have a little bit more medical exposure, as it were, when you traveled to the continent of Africa. And I don't know if people know this, but you worked, I believe, in a hospital, an Anglican mission hospital, for a year. And you also hitchhiked, is that correct? Across the equator from one ocean to the other.
I did indeed. When I was 10 years old, that was a great year of African independence. And for reasons that nobody knows. I mean, it's not like, we used to have a Coleman family reunion, my mother's family reunion. We used to give these funny prizes. And one was the I Ain't Left Nothing Back in Africa award. And my father got it every year. There was no interest in going back to Africa. I'm not going to pretend. And that was true for many African Americans at that time. Not all of them, obviously. But when I was 10, I was smitten. We had a current affairs course, and we had a great teacher. All my teachers were women, except this one man, Mr. McHenry. And he put up a current events map each week and would have 8 or 9 circles on it. It was a map of the world, a flat map. And obviously that year, I think 19 countries on the continent became independent. I became intrigued by the African continent, and I memorized the names of the countries, the capitals, and the presidents. Lumumba, the Chambe, they were just so Nyerere, Kenyatta, they were just so lyrical. And of course, Kwame Nkrumah, Sudan was first in 56, Ghana second in 57. But in 1960, Nigeria, it was marvelous. And I would listen to the evening news, and however they said the name, that's how I would say the name. And about the same time, I read an essay in Reader's Digest. Remember Reader's Digest? And we used to get Reader's Digest every month, and Reader's Digest books. And there was an article about an African boy who basically walked across the equator, been saved by these missionaries, and ended up in the United States. So I wanted to go to Africa. And at the end of my sophomore year at Yale, which the year culminated, that was 69-70, with the big May Day strike. All the American universities went on strike after Nixon and Kissinger invaded Cambodia. But Yale went on strike in protest of the way the Black Panthers were being harassed by the police and persecuted. Bobby Seale was on trial a block from Calhoun College, where my dorm room. And so we went on strike for the Panthers in the middle of in the middle of April. Then the whole world did. Then I went to Harvard Summer School to take pre-med courses because Yale didn't have summer school. But I had applied for this program called 5-year BA. And it was so named, literally, because it would take one 5 years to get a BA, because one would take a year off and work. 12 people were chosen. And you had to work in what we used to call the third world, the developing world. And I picked Tanzania. And I picked Tanzania because our church, the Episcopal Church, is in the Anglican Communion, and its sister diocese, the Diocese of West Virginia sister diocese, is the Diocese of Central Tanganyika. as it used to be called. So I ended up in a mission hospital in the village of Kilamatindi, which is about 4 hours by land cruiser, Land Rover back then. And I turned 20 in that village. And it was a 120-bed hospital for 50,000 people. There was no running water. We had kerosene torches, we called them. I lived with 5 European missionaries, Australians, and one Irish female doctor. They put me in an old German prison because it was Tanganyika was a German colony, and there was a German cemetery there. And I actually, I got there in August of 1970, and I just stayed there in that village until December. I mean, after a while, I had to get to Dar es Salaam, and then I was in Dar es Salaam. And I decided I wanted to sail to Zanzibar, and you could go down to the dock, and basically for $1, 7 shillings at that time, you could just get on a fishing boat, a dhow, D-H-O-W, and you'd sail overnight to Zanzibar. And I met this white guy who just graduated from Harvard. And he said, he was on the boat, and he said his fantasy had been to hitchhike from Cape to Cairo, like Cecil Rhodes's railroad fantasy. And he had gone to what's now Namibia, Southwest Africa, to help SWAPO, and had taken the South African secret police about 15 seconds to figure out he was there, kick him out. And Dar es Salaam was a refuge for all of the revolutionary groups because Nyerere provided them with resources. And that's why he was there. And we flipped the coin, and I said, no, I wanted to hitchhike across the equator. I won, and it took us 2 months. We started in Dar, we went to Mombasa, and then to Nairobi, to Kampala, we were in Kampala a couple of days after Idi Amin's coup, when the Buganda were celebrating their liberation from Obote, because Obote was going to nationalize all their land, and that story is short-changed. So then down to Kigali, and then to Goma, and then 6 days on the back of a beer truck to Kisangani, and then we sailed all the way down the Congo River, and I got severe amoebic dysentery. They thought I was going to die, but I made it. And I was nursed back to health by some Catholic nuns in Kinshasa, and then I flew to Lagos, and that was in February or March of 1971, my first visit to my beloved Nigeria. And then I flew to Accra because the whole goal was to make a pilgrimage to the grave of W.E.B. Du Bois. And he was buried outside of the castle at that time before they moved him to the mausoleum where his remains are now housed. And I took a photograph. I had to beg a guard to let me through the chain. And I told him I'd hitchhiked all the way across Africa to see Du Bois, who was my hero. And the guy said, okay. And I took a photograph, which hangs on the wall in the director's office of the Hutchins Center, just about 3 blocks from my home here in Harvard Square. And so by the time I was 20, I had visited 6 African countries. And when I came back to Yale, and this was important because everybody had big afros, they had dashikis, and people were talking a bunch of trash about our African ancestors, this and they were essentializing Africa. They were being reductive. They didn't know what they were talking about. Their whole knowledge of Africa came from Jan Heinz Jan's book, Muntu, which is very reductive in its conclusions. And, and nobody could tell me about Africa then. I had been there. And then I end up at Clare 2 years later, and there is the future Nobel laureate. We had no idea in 1973. And there's the greatest African philosopher in history, the budding genius, Kwame Anthony Appiah. How can I not thank God every day for the life I've lived?
So Skip, you see, this is why we are going to be here 8 days, because your storytelling is incredible, and your life and how it interweaves with all these amazing moments and points and people in history. I think you need to do a documentary that actually traces that hitchhiking route. But I'm going to move us on just because there's so much that I want to touch on in such a little time. And I want to say that, one of the things that's just there's such breadth and depth and diversity to your work that it almost defies description. Whether we're looking at some of your seminal work like The Signifying Monkey, your work with Zora Neale Hurston, and all sorts of many different kinds of artists and writers, to the forgotten works that you have unearthed and brought to our attention, to your films, which we'll get to at some point, hopefully. And through all of your work, I think what's particularly fascinating to me, Skip, is your curatorial instinct. And you see this, you know, in your institution building, you see this in the Hutchins Center, you've got everything from the hip hop archive to a museum. Your home itself is like a museum. What guides you in terms of, as a curator? I mean, you're like a curator to the African diasporas as well. So how do you choose what is a guide for you as you do your curatorial work?
I've been interviewed hundreds and hundreds of times, at least no one's ever asked me that question. So I need to think about it. I think one never knows one's entire motivations. You know, why are you? Why is one who one is? But I would say I have a short attention span. I get bored easily, and I'm a curious person. And if you add all those up, they come out me. I'm an entrepreneur. There's no question that it's part of my DNA. I think all intellectuals are an entrepreneur. To me, to think of the plot of a novel in your case and then to write it, that is to have an idea and then to see it embodied in the world. I think that's what entrepreneurs do. So I think all intellectuals have that trait. They just don't turn it into financing and, you know, brick and mortar and into something in 3 dimensions. Mm-hmm. I didn't study African American studies. I don't have a degree in African and African American studies. I have a BA in history, American political history, and a PhD in English language and literature, as they say over there. But I took several courses in what we broadly call Black Studies at Yale. And one of the things I realized is that each successive generation of our people had to reinvent the wheel. If you want to disempower people, you want to enslave people metaphysically, you rob them of memory, you rob them of continuity. And that caused me an enormous amount of grief and frustration. And I would say, wow, if only Booker T. Washington and Du Bois could have taken 2 steps back and figured out, look, we can beat them with a 1-2 punch. There's more than enough pie to go around. Martin and Malcolm, you know, now we partly romanticize, partly wishful thinking that they were moving closer together, which is undoubtedly true. But if they could have figured out behind closed doors, look, you know, Malcolm will go out and scare the white man to death. Martin will come clean up, pick up the pieces, right? There's been so much hatred within the group. And we were taught that the one Negro syndrome, as we used to call it, that James Baldwin had to destroy Richard Wright. Ellison had to destroy Baldwin and Wright. You know, there was only going to be one, and it's either you or me. And, you know, that's the battle royale scene in Invisible Man's all about that. Well, I decided that if I ever ended up in this field, I wanted to conceive of and complete foundational projects on which subsequent generations could build, so that never again did anyone have to do these things. And if you study the history of disciplines, you know, when you're a student, you think, you know, God or Plato invented all the disciplines, you know, philosophy or anthropology or chemistry, but each discipline has a history been created by human beings. So I began to study the history of certain disciplines and then viewed African and African American studies as just another discipline. So you weren't reinventing the wheel. And fate then put me in a position to completely, from the ground up, build African and African American studies at Harvard with the help of Anthony Appiah, the first person that I hired. Now we have 41 professors. But it's that foundation that was behind my motivation for editing the Encyclopedia Africana, which I did with Anthony, with Woolley as the chair of the board. And we did it with Bill Gates and Carta Africana. I'm very proud of that. It was put in Bill Clinton put it in a time capsule. And 100 years from now, it'll be open, and it'll be such primitive technology, I'm sure. But the you know, if you want to see Bessie Smith, you click on Bessie Smith. She's singing from 1925. You know, it was great. We're doing dictionaries, or Oxford Press asked me just last week if I was interested in editing a Black version of the OED. The usage that Black people, the words that Black people have created, like cool and hokum and whatever, it bees that way sometime, and get down, and, you know, and that had been a fantasy of mine after editing the Encyclopedia Africana, a Black version of Britannica, to do what Murray did for the English language, or Samuel Johnson, one of my prized possessions. I have a first edition of Samuel Johnson's dictionary, 1755. Yeah, I couldn't believe it, you know. It's so that's what I want to do. Because the only way that we can progress as a people is if your children, your son, whom I know very well and admire, if his generation does not have, or my granddaughter's generation, and she's 6, if they don't have to start all over. Now, with the Norton Anthology of African American Literature, which I'm very, very proud of, which I edited with 10 of my colleagues, if you don't like our canon, you can edit it, you can modify it, but you don't have to start from the beginning anymore. There's none of that. And that's why I do what I do. And I think that my curiosity comes from the fact that I was raised in a village.
It takes a village, as they say. So,
we didn't go on vacation. Vacation for us was going to Aunt Loretta's house. You know, we'd go on the train and the bus, and we'd sleep on the floor, and there was one bathroom, and I hesitate to think it probably was one towel.
Skip, so I'm going to interrupt you a little bit here and also say that you're a great curator of people. And by way of example, I want to talk about one of your film series, which is Finding Your Roots. And 2 of our guests in this series, the great Anna Deavere Smith, playwright, actor, and Senator Cory Booker, have been a part of that series. And you've just had such interesting, you've had everyone from Nancy Pelosi to Marco Rubio, John Lewis to John McCain, you know, actors, you've had some non-Americans, Richard Branson and so forth. And I think you've already highlighted kind of what inspired you to do this fantastic, amazing series. But I wonder if you can speak for a bit about whether this changes the way that people, your guests, see America and or see their place within America.
Thank you very much for your kind words. I love making this series. And I got the idea after a Black geneticist in the year 2000 wrote me and said, "Dear Dr. Gates, have you ever seen Roots?" And I was thinking, what kind of idiot this is the guy I am, everybody's seen Roots. He said, well, we can now do what Alex Haley claimed to do, that he had done, in a test tube on your mother's 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 line. And I couldn't believe it. And he said, we're looking for, we're looking for guinea pigs, volunteers to know for African-American men, and nobody will say yes, you know, and I soon learned why, and I'll tell you in a minute. So I called this guy, Dr. Rick Kittles down at Howard, and offered to fly him up immediately, which he did. He came from Washington to Boston and came to my home in Cambridge. And I told him that, you know, unbeknownst to him, I'd been interested in my own family tree, as I mentioned, since I was 9 years old. And that I'd been to Africa, and that I wanted to know about my African roots. And so I volunteered. And so they took my blood. And that was a painful part, you know. And that's why nobody else was dumb enough to, to agree to be a guinea pig. But they did my mitochondrial DNA, which is your genetic fingerprint signature that you get from your mother's 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 line. And for most African Americans, obviously, if you think about it, or most New World Black people, that would go straight to Africa. Because if you have white ancestry, you will come from the father's line because of rape, cajoled sexuality, however you want to put it. And so they did my DNA, and they said that I was from Nubia. Now, all African Americans want to either be Nubians or they want to be Zulus. Zulus because of Chaka Zulu and the warrior, you know, and you kick the white man in the behind. Right? Nubian because they're the black pharaohs of the Nile. 25th dynasty. People argue about what color the Egyptians were, but there's no doubt the 25th dynasty, which was between 725 BC and 650 BC. They were black, and we have found statues they made of themselves, and they were black people, and no doubt about that. But the Nubians are mixed over the Egyptians. So I got my certificate of Nubianality, you know, and I showed it to Anthony Appiah. He looked at it, he said, "What a ton of rubbish." And I said, "You just jealous." Because, you know, Anthony's uncle was the Asantehene, you know, the king of the Asante. But, you know, I knew that deep down that he was right, because Nubia ran between what's now Khartoum and the Aswan Dam, more or less. So what did my ancestors do? Walk across the Sahara Desert, to jump on a slave ship bound for Alabama so they could pick cotton for free, you know? You know, did that. It turned out that Rick Kittles was being kind because he wanted me to have my African ethnic ancestry. I am in the 5% of African Americans who descend from a white great-great-grandfather, and I knew that. The man who fathered Jane Gates' children was a white man, because all her children looked white. And my Y DNA goes straight to Ireland, so there's no question about that. He was just anonymous, but now they've actually found his identity, which we'll reveal in the next season after COVID, which is quite purely through DNA and triangulation. But on my mother's side, Sarah, I descend from a white woman who in colonial times slept with a black enslaved man. So my mitochondrial DNA does not go to Nubia, it goes straight to the United Kingdom. So if a Martian came down and just looked at my Y DNA, which is your father's line, and mitochondrial DNA, which is your mother's line, I'm white. But in my admixture, I'm 50% sub-Saharan African and 50% European, which means if you had an ideally populated family tree of mine, my ancestors, half would be white and half would be black. The average African American is 24.8% white or European. They have never tested an African American, any of the three major commercial DNA companies, who is 100% African. That's quite astonishing. However, they wanted to check themselves because they thought maybe there was something wrong with the test. They have tested plenty of Africans who were 100% sub-Saharan African. And that just shows you the extent of sexual exploitation in the slave trade and under the regime of slavery. But I always ask my guests at the end of a reveal, which takes about 4 hours to film, and what you see is 30 minutes on TV from that 4 hours. Does anything that we've shared today change your view of America, American history, and your relation to it? And everyone says yes. It's a way of telling history by inserting an individual. You know, it appeals to the voyeur part of each of us. You're looking over the shoulder of a famous person and watching their ancestors inserted into an historical period, which makes it much more vivid, whether it's the Crimean War or the War of 1812 or the American Revolution or the Civil War, you know, World War I or World War II or whatever. It shows that we're all immigrants in this country. Our African ancestors came here in chains. They were forced immigrants, but they were immigrants nonetheless. Even the Native Americans migrated here 15,000 years ago across the Bering Strait. So literally we're all migrants, and at the level of the genome, we're 99.9% the same. Yeah. That is the political message of finding your roots. And I like doing it because I like history. I like, it's mind-blowing what you could find. I mean, genealogists are geniuses, and they turn up these amazing documents using federal census records and estate records and tax records and baptism, and Catholic priests in little parish churches in Cuba, for example, just writing down, little Sarah was born today, and you know, her father is Giuseppe and her mother is Maria, you know, and we are able, using digitization made this series possible, but not everything's been digitized. But and as you know, the Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, has a belief that they can find your ancestors and baptize them. And so they have been collecting genealogical records since 1839. And because of them, we have this fantastic digitized database through Family Search, which has been licensed to Ancestry.com. Full disclosure, that's the leading sponsor for Finding Your Roots. So you can do a lot of this work just from your computer, wherever you are in the world. But there's a lot that has not been digitized. So we send researchers to wherever your ancestors were from. In your case, we'd send them to Lagos, so we'd send them to England, to whatever village your ancestors were from.
Yeah.
And I have learned so much about world history.
Yeah.
I just did Tony Shalhoub, and of course we know about the Armenian genocide in 1915, but his ancestor was killed in the warm-up for that genocide in 1895.
Yeah.
When the Turks, the Ottomans were killed 50,000 Armenians in 1895. And they crucified this person upside down, according to the newspaper report. Just things like that you learn on everybody's family tree. So it has a very political function as we see the slumbering beast of white supremacy rearing its ugly head in America, brought on without doubt by the election of the first Black president.
Let's come to that. I mean, again, that's just a powerful series, as you were outlining, and you've touched on white supremacy, in which allows me in a few minutes that I have left to jump onto your most recent series on the Black church, which is just—
Amen.
Amen. Has the Lord put a song on your heart to sing to us today? Because, you know, that's one thing I love about you, your singing voice too. Yeah. But as you know, I'm a pastor's daughter.
I know that.
Yeah.
You're a preacher's kid, a PK.
I'm a preacher's kid. So yeah, so the best type. But
you're Anglican, I trust.
Absolutely. So this series, as with all of your films, just tells the small stories and it tells the bigger stories. It tells the story of America. And there were so many things, we don't have time, but that I would love to discuss about each of your series. But this one in particular, one of the things you highlight is how churches, which are refuge places, and particularly for African-American churches as a refuge for African-Americans, were targeted over time by white supremacists. And you know, your series before this was looking at the Reconstruction period and really kind of the rise of white supremacy in response to that. And I want to ask you an overarching question, sort of a question about perspective, which is, how far have we come? How far has America come since Reconstruction? Indeed, since the civil rights and up to this moment of supposed racial reckoning? Well,
it's a marvelous question. I mean, there are people who actually believe we were better off under segregation, but I think that's an oversimplification and, you know, rose-colored glasses. And there's no question that we're better off today than we were 100 years ago. Since Dr. King was killed, the Black middle class has doubled and the Black upper middle class has quadrupled. We are having this conversation because of Brown v. Board. You know, otherwise we wouldn't be having this conversation. Now, I would have gone to college. 3 generations of my family went to Howard during my great aunt Pansy in 1909. But I wouldn't have gone to the Ivy League. So it would have been highly unlikely. So we've had a tremendous amount of progress, and the first Black president, and almost 50 Congress men and women, and including my classmate Sheila Jackson Lee from Barbara Jordan's district in Houston, and Black men in the Senate, most recently Reverend Ralph Warnock. There's no question that we made an enormous amount of progress, but there also is no question that white supremacy is alive and well. I tell my students at Harvard in my lecture course, Introduction to African American Studies, that there are 2 streams constantly flowing under the floorboards of Western culture. One is anti-Semitism and one is anti-Black racism. No matter what happens, no matter what you see above ground, they are there. And those floorboards can be lifted up and those forces dippered out and poured into vessels anytime. And we see that happening. You know, there are pogroms going back to the Middle Ages. Anti-Black racism is as old as interracial contact. And it's fundamentally tied with economics, as you well know, both are. Anti-Semitism is as well. And as the expectations for future economic growth have diminished for white Americans, that has been directly proportional to the rise of white supremacy. It's one thing to welcome women and people of color into historically white male institutions, such as Yale or Harvard, or Oxford and Cambridge, or whatever the institution. It's one thing to do that if you have a full economy, as we did in the late 60s, when we thought we could do guns and butter, that we could solve the problems of poverty in America with Great Society and win the Vietnam War, both of which were stupid, silly ideas. We should never have been in Vietnam in the first place. But we had full employment. But when the economy shrinks, all of a sudden, you and I, if there's only this much liquid in this glass, I'm gonna take a long look at you and a long look at this glass and decide how much we're gonna share and who's gonna be able to drink from the glass. That's an oversimplified comparison, of course, but that's the way it is. So that when people are threatened economically, they lash out and they need to demonize. And demagogues like Donald Trump manipulated those fears using the tropes of white supremacy. People used to ask me, is Donald Trump a racist when he was running? I'd say, well, I never met him. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but there's no question that he's a genius at manipulating the tropes of white supremacy. Well, hello, anybody listening? He's a racist, pure and simple. And I'm glad if he had won, it would have been like the end of Reconstruction. He had done so many things to turn the clock back, and voter suppression would have been mounted as successfully as they're trying to do in Georgia, but as they were able to do at the end of Reconstruction. I'll give you one quick example. In 1890, there were 130,000 Black men registered to vote in Louisiana. Louisiana, South Carolina, Mississippi were majority Black states, and Florida, Alabama, and Georgia were almost majority Black states until 1910. After voter suppression, through the writing of new state constitutional conventions, the number of Black men registered to vote in Louisiana by 1904 was reduced precisely from 130,000 to 1,342. That's amazing. They just took away the right to vote because that was a key to Black power. And 90% of all Black people lived in the southern states in the former Confederacy. So the problems that we face now are economic problems, and economic inequality is across the color line and the ethnic line, but it exacerbates racism and and the rise of white supremacy. So we have to solve the problem of inequality in order sufficiently to solve the problem of anti-Black racism. And I think that Joe Biden and Kamala, who's a dear friend, someone I admire very, very much, and who I hope will be the next president of the United States after Biden, God willing, has 2 terms. I hope that their programs, it seems to me as an outsider and a non-expert, that their programs are targeting structural inequality. Because no matter how many Silicon Valley billionaires are giving tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of charity to in our Black Lives Matter moment, in our post-George Floyd moment, that is like a drop in the ocean. So that is not going to solve systemic racism that's 300 or 400 years old. I'm sorry, it's just not. If these people gave that as much money as they're giving now every year, it would be a beginning. But one-time donations, even of $100 million or $50 million, is just not enough. Just not enough.
I think underscoring the importance of addressing structural inequality is a great point to end our conversation, which has gone on longer. And I've got through about 0.1% of what I wanted to speak with you about. So we need to continue this. But I did, just for the audience to know, we're going to run a little bit over because we always have some very special guests for that. And I've curated a group for you, thinking about this great picture that you have in your office, where you're standing with in your home office, you're standing with your peers in the Pantheon. I think I'm remembering correctly, Toni Morrison, Derek Walcott, these are all, and Wole Soyinka. So I'm bringing some amazing people to join the party here, as it were. And each of them, we could talk with each of these wonderful people as well for hours and hours. So as you're seeing, we've got the amazing Charlene, and legendary Charlene Hunter-Gault, civil rights activist, incredible journalist, and we have Margaret Busby, your sister, in amazing curatorial things that she's done, publisher, editor, all of these people, the one and only. We have the amazing Professor Wole.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
Who you've introduced.
And Charlotte Wole, Margaret.
And we have Strive, and we have the great Strive Masiwa, who is a former guest. He generously gave of his time to this series.
Hey, Strive, how you doing, man?
And philanthropist. So
this is amazing. What a surprise. Look at Charlene. You know, I would never have done the Black church with it. Charlene drags me to church on Martha's Vineyard every Sunday, and that's after I'm out on Saturday night, drinking a lot of wine, talking smack, eating too much food, and she wakes me up. She called me. I can't say what she called me. She goes, you wait. And then she saves a seat at Union Chapel and drags me in there, and I always leave feeling good. And look at Wole over in, are you in Lagos or Abeokuta, Professor Soyinka? And you're on mute. Wole, you're on mute.
So dear Professor Soyinka, you're on mute. You need to unmute that little symbol on the screen. So
bottom left.
So on your screen in the bottom left, there's something that says mute and also stop video. And don't stop the video, but please click on the button that says mute to unmute.
Maybe Dia unmute him.
Looks like a red microphone with a. No?
So Elizabeth, is there any way that we can manually help?
Oh yeah, he did.
Fantastic.
Right.
Oh, there you are.
Bravo.
Yes. I think. How are you?
Hey,
So,
Professor,
Skip,
how are you doing, my
you.
man?
Yes. And I see you've got my favorite painting, right? When are you going to hand that painting over to me, for heaven's sake? Favorite painting.
when you give me my 6 favorite pieces from your collection.
All right. That's the deal. We'll work on that later.
All right, that's great. You know, Sarah, when you were talking about
fascination, you and your stories, you're incredible.
Thank you. Well, I can't believe it.
This is to see you, and Margaret, of course.
Hi, Prof.
This is like a birthday present, a birthday party. Sarah, I can't believe it. Margaret, how are you, darling?
I'm okay. Good to see everybody. Wow. And what a wonderful story you got to tell, your life story. Wow.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know you guys were listening. I thought it was just me and Sarah.
Don't worry. You were handling it for everybody. You know, you cover for the rest of us. No, don't worry.
Hey,
now
Sarah,
you may wonder why you didn't get it. You know, Sarah, my daughter says, do you two talk every day? I said every single day, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, always, usually on email. And I'm just wondering if you wondered at all why you didn't hear from me this morning.
I was worried, you know, I was really worried. And you know, in the era of COVID, you don't hear from your friends, you go, oh my God, you know, I hope everybody's okay. And
I know.
No, I can't believe that you're there.
But you know, and I'm so glad to see everybody else. It's just, wow, amazing. I just want to say one quick thing though, that's very important in terms of what Dr. Gates was talking about in terms of the Black church, because one of the things that we do together every Sunday, we go online virtually and listen to the Reverend Otis Moss III. Now, normally that's where I drag him on the vineyard to the church. And sometimes I get ugly looks because I save a seat and the church is packed and they're wondering, why am I sitting there with my pocketbook and everything else I can stomp? You know, I'm waiting for him. Anyway, this past Sunday, we were on the service. And I think that the message really does embrace everything that Skip was just talking about, and I think that all of us can embrace. And it was Easter Sunday, and he was talking about Good Friday, and how the Bible verse says, "It is finished." And then our friend Otis, who is the real son of his father, because he's a great preacher, but he also is sort of into the hip hop because he's of another generation. So he talked about how it is finished, but it ain't over. That was what he added to it. And I think that that's what Skip is able to convey in all of the things he just said, that, you know, there's so much going on. I heard this morning that there are more Black women with COVID than anybody. And we have to be very concerned about that because so many of them are afraid of the vaccine. And I mean, there are just so many challenges, but we've got people like all of you on this panel here to wish Skip, our great, wonderful intellectual leader. And that's what keeps me hopeful, that we've still got people who are making a contribution. And when we talk about a younger generation, I talk about a coalition of the generations, because the younger people need to learn from Wole and Margaret and Strive and you, Sarah, who's going to be on a panel with me soon. And I'm just so glad that we're all together today, because you give me hope.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Thank you, Charlene.
That is so well put. Sarah, I forgot to tell you something about my relationship with Wole Soyinka. In addition to introducing me to African literature and African mythology, he introduced me to Bordeaux, Burgundy, Sauvignon Blanc. I didn't even know what wine was. I thought it was Mogan David and Ripple, or Boone's Farm apple wine. You know,
I thought you were going to say Dodo, but instead you went right for the libations.
No, he also introduced me to Ebba, Dodo, Starbeer, Goulder.
Prof, please respond.
I try to be a rounded teacher. That's all. That enables my pupils to pile every negative thing about them on me. That's okay. That's okay. At least I enjoyed the teaching process. That's my reward. I remember the wine sessions. Yes. And
I just want to say quick.
I think there's still remember else in Cambridge, at least during that period. I think they still do, the natives.
Yes.
Professor Soyinka, I wanted to do a quick shout out, because the whole world is so excited for your upcoming book. I think it's called your next novel,
Yes.
Chronicles from the Happiest People on Earth, I think is the title. So
that's right.
Out in a couple of months' time, we're so excited to read. Strive, I wanted to just make sure that you have a little time to say a little something in this very amazing panel of greats, of which you
are.
Hey, Strive.
Hey, Skips, good to see you, man. I'm having mixed feelings at the moment. I didn't want to be interrupted in that beautiful conversation that was going on between you and Sarah.
Oh.
But then when I got interrupted, I saw Wole, you know? And well, you know, I'll accept the interruption for now. I haven't seen Wole for quite a while. How are you, my elder brother? Good to see you, man. You're looking fantastic. You're looking great, man. And Charlene, I haven't seen you in the South for a while. Remember those days when you were in South Africa and you used to harass me?
I never forget. In fact, I was writing to someone this morning in South Africa, and I said, good day, Butiwami. I don't forget my guru. Kunjani Strive.
How are you, my sister? Good to see you. Good to see you, Margaret. Great to see you. Thanks.
Hi, good to meet you. You know, I've just realized, can I just say something?
Margaret, please do.
I just realized that I abridged both a memoir by you, Skip, and by you, Prof, in 1995.
That's right.
And I don't know how I dared do it, because when you abridge a book, you're sort of chucking out 90% of it. And I was thrilled that you actually read it yourself, Skip, but I
remember.
You remember? And I think
Yes.
I must have been quite busy that year, because it was September 1995. I did an abridgment of Ake, and I did an abridgment of colored people.
I remember, and I thank you. And congratulations on your recent triumphs too, your continuous triumphs. You're you have made such a difference to Black Britain. I mean, my God, it's such a dramatic difference today than it was back in the day when I met Wally and Kwame. Black people at Cambridge were were quite rare, shall we say? You changed the publishing industry in Britain, and you're a hero, a heroine, whatever I'm supposed to say.
Thank you.
I'll say an historic figure. And Strive, where are you, by the way, Strive?
I'm in London, Skip. I'm in London. We were supposed to meet last year, but this COVID thing, we need to get rid of it.
I know.
Yeah,
well,
you and I, we need to get together soon.
Well, we're vaccinated.
Our friend Misan Sage in London. She's a playwright and a doctor and a member of the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. I was going to say, if you suck up to her, maybe you could come with her family to Martha's Vineyard this summer and move in with Skip for a few days.
Well, Wally's going to be there. There's one thing for sure.
Oh yeah, we have such fun, don't we? Except that I'm gonna drag you to church on Sunday.
I can't wait. I want to do a sequel to the Black Church. But Wally, you've been vaccinated, right, Wally?
Mm-hmm. Well, the Black Church, I was actually going to make a remark. The Black Church in the United States, I have to tell you my experience with it. Even when I was a student in England studying literature, I was also studying personally what I call comparative religions. And I went to churches, mosques, shrines, temples, etc. And so on my first visit to the United States, I visited a Black church. And it was somewhere up in Harlem. And I tell you, I was frightened. I was frightened by the phenomenon of possession. People going into a trance. I'd seen things like that, at home, of course, but I'd never seen such physicality, such contortion. Little did I know that in that same United States, I would do a production in which I sent my actors, actresses into trance. Remember, Skip?
Yes.
Death and the King's Horseman?
That's right.
Then with the actresses, and then even the male actors who were supposed to be immune to this, started getting possessed at certain moments of the play, from rehearsal to production, and I had to choreograph them off stage during that period. And in one case, I remember the possession went on for long afterwards. I did all the juju I knew from home, all incantations, related or unrelated, I poured on her head. We even called Western medicine, the doctor. Anyway, from everywhere, she came out of it. But I tell you, my mind went straight to that encounter in the Black church in the States, and really frightened me. So it's something about that Black church, which I think both psychologists and anthropologists and even human anatomists should really look into. There is something in there which is totally inexplicable.
No, it's true. And the last chapter of my book is on the what Du Bois called the frenzy and the trance, the possession by the Holy Ghost. And it's the truth. It's amazing. It used to scare me so much, Sarah, that the Church of God in Christ was on the right side of the street, and the Methodist church, my grandmother's church, was on the left. When I turned the corner, I'd cross over to the left, so I wouldn't. If I walked by the Holiness Church, I thought the Holy Ghost was going to snatch me.
Well, I think speaking of being in a trance, the hundreds who are watching, we're all in a trance, and it seems unbelievable that we have these greats from Margaret Busby, Professor Shoyinka, Charlene Hunter-Gault, Strive Masiwa, and the amazing Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. What a blessing this has been. I wish this could go on for a long time more, and perhaps we can make that happen at some point. But I just really want to thank you all. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you do to make this world a better place. You're all great, and Skip, this has been such a joy. Thank you.
Thank you. You talked about curatorial powers. You're the queen of curatorial power. Thank you for curating my friends and for a marvelous afternoon. I can't believe I'm seeing Charlene, Strive, Margaret, and Wale together. Thank you, Sarah. I love you so much.
Thank you. Love you back.
Okay. God bless. Bye.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Well, thank you all so much. This has been a delightful and enlightening conversation. Thank you to Dr. Gates for joining us today, and to Sarah Ladipo Manyika. Sarah has graciously given us her time and energy for the past year, during which we have produced 10 incredible conversations across the diaspora programs. She will be taking a break from the series in order to concentrate on her own writing, but she never strays too far. In fact, we already have her lined up for a program in June with Joan Lester about her new memoir, Loving Before Loving, A Marriage in Black and White. That'll be on June 11th in celebration of Loving Day, so please join us for that. Also, we do rely on donations from our audience, so please consider supporting the museum, either by donating or by becoming a member. We also would love to hear your feedback on today's program, so please take a few moments to fill out our virtual program survey. You can find a link in the chat, or you can take a photo of this QR code. The survey will also pop up when you leave this Zoom. Thank you again to Peggy Woodford Forbes for her generous support, and to the San Francisco Public Library. We hope to see you all on April 28th with our exciting conversation with Hanif Abdurraqib. Please join us, and please continue to support and participate in MOAD's programs. Thank you so much.